The air shimmered with an electric hum, like the buzz before a sold-out concert. Chris Callahan, a 28-year-old indie pop sensation from Nashville, Tennessee, stood frozen in his cramped studio, mid-strum on his vintage Fender guitar. 1 second, he was tweaking a new track, the scent of coffee and old vinyl filling the room. The next, a blinding flash tore through his senses, and the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of colors. His stomach lurched as if he'd been yanked through a cosmic riptide. When the light faded, he stumbled forward, guitar still slung over his shoulder, and landed on cold, polished marble. He blinked, disoriented, his sneakers squeaking against the floor. Towering above him were golden chandeliers dripping with crystals, their candlelight casting a warm, flickering glow across ornate frescoes and gilded walls. The faint trill of a harpsichord floated through the air, delicate but repetitive, like a song stuck on loop. Men in powdered wigs and women in corseted gowns glided past, their silk skirts rustling, their eyes flicking toward him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Chris's ripped jeans, leather jacket, and neon green AirPods dangling from his neck made him look like an alien who'd crash-landed in a museum. "Where the hell am I?" he muttered, running a hand through his tousled black hair. A passing servant, balancing a silver tray of pastries, gasped and scurried away, muttering in French. Chris's high school French kicked in just enough to catch the word Versailles. His heart skipped. Versailles? As in, the Palace of Versailles? The one he'd half paid attention to in history class? He glanced at a gilded clock on the wall, its hands frozen at 3:17. The date etched below it read 1700. "No way," he whispered, a grin tugging at his lips despite the panic clawing at his chest. "I've traveled. This is epic." Chris wasn't your typical Nashville dreamer. He'd clawed his way from dive bars to Spotify charts, with his genre-bending pop anthems think The Weeknd meets Fleetwood Mac, with a dash of Prince's swagger. His music was raw, electric, and unapologetic, the kind that made you want to dance until dawn or cry into your whiskey. But now, standing in the heart of Louis XIV's opulent court, he was a fish out of water, a rock star in a world of minuets and monarchs. He slung his guitar over his back and wandered, ignoring the stairs. The palace was a labyrinth of extravagant marble corridors, mirrored halls, and gardens that stretched into infinity. But the music? It was everywhere, and it was dull. Harpsichords plinked out predictable melodies, violins wailed in stiff, formal patterns. To Chris, it sounded like elevator music for aristocrats. He smirked, imagining what these powdered wig types would do if he dropped a bass line or a synth riff. His first encounter came in the Hall of Mirrors, a glittering corridor where the elite strutted like peacocks. A group of young noblewomen, their faces painted with rouge, giggled behind lace fans as he passed. One, bolder than the rest, stepped forward. Her name was Elodie, a viscountess with sapphire eyes and a smile that could start wars. Her gown, a cascade of emerald silk, hugged her curves in a way that made Chris's pulse quicken. "You're no courtier," she said in accented English, her voice a sultry melody. "Your attire, it's barbaric, yet intriguing." Her gaze lingered on his guitar, then flicked to his face. "What manner of man are you?" Chris flashed his signature grin, the one that had charmed crowds from Austin to L.A. "Name's Chris Callahan, ma'am. I'm a musician, and trust me, you've never heard anything like my sound." Elodie arched a brow, amused. "A musician? Then you must play for us. The court's music grows tiresome. Monsieur Lully, the king's composer, rules with an iron baton, but his compositions lack fire. Fire, huh? Chris's eyes sparkled. I've got that in spades. She led him to a salon where a small crowd of nobles lounged on velvet cushions, sipping wine and gossiping. A harpsichord sat in the corner, its ivory keys gleaming. Chris's fingers itched. He hadn't played for an audience in, well, hours, but it felt like a lifetime. Elodie clapped her hands, drawing attention. This stranger claims to be a musician, she announced, her tone teasing. Let us see if he can rival our court's finest. The nobles murmured, skeptical but intrigued. Chris unslung his guitar, but a stern voice cut through the room. What is this contraption? A man in a crimson coat, his wig towering, strode forward. His name was Monsieur Lully, the king's music master, and his scowl could curdle cream. You dare bring such a peasant's toy into Versailles? Chris didn't flinch. This toy is gonna blow your mind, old man. Step aside and let me work. Lully's face reddened, but Elodie's laughter silenced him. Let him play, monsieur, or do you fear a challenge? Grudgingly, Lully stepped back. Chris sat at the harpsichord, his guitar resting nearby. He cracked his knuckles, closed his eyes, and let his instincts take over. His fingers danced across the keys, coaxing out a melody that started soft, haunting, like a ballad you'd hear at a midnight diner. Then he shifted gears, layering in a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat, a pop-infused groove that felt like it belonged in a Brooklyn club, not a 17th century palace. The nobles gasped. Elodie's eyes widened, her fan frozen mid-flutter. Even Lully's scowl faltered. Chris leaned into the music, his voice low and soulful, as he sang lyrics he'd written for a breakup track back in 2025. Lost in the neon, chasing the spark. You left me stranded, alone in the dark. But I'm rising, burning, rewriting the stars. This heart's a wildfire. It's tearing apart. The room erupted. Nobles clapped, some standing, others swaying as if possessed. Elodie clapped her hands, her cheeks flushed. Magnifique, she cried. It's as if the heavens themselves sing through you. Lully, however, was not amused. This is no music, he spat. It's chaos, a mockery of our sacred art. Chris winked at him. Call it karaoke if you want, buddy, but your sacred art is putting people to sleep. The nobles laughed, and Lully's face turned purple. He stormed out, muttering about barbarians and insults to the king. Chris didn't care. He'd found his stage, and Versailles was his new arena. Word of the strange minstrel spread like wildfire. By nightfall, invitations to perform flooded in from dukes, countesses, and even the king's mistress, Madame de Maintenon, whose curiosity was piqued by tales of a savage with a golden voice. But trouble was brewing. Lully, humiliated, plotted in the shadows, whispering to his allies about the heretic who dared disrupt the court's harmony. And Chris, oblivious to the danger, was too busy reveling in his newfound fame. He performed in candlelit salons, taught noblewomen to clap to his beats, and even flirted with Elodie, whose teasing glances and sharp wit kept him on his toes. She was no groupie-ish, was a firecracker, matching his banter with a spark that made his heart race. One night, as he strummed his guitar in a moonlit garden, Elodie joined him, her gown shimmering like starlight. You're no ordinary man, Chris Callahan," she murmured, her breath warm against his ear. "But beware, Versailles is a gilded cage. Cross the wrong soul, and you'll find daggers in the dark." Chris chuckled, brushing off her warning. "I've dealt with jealous bandmates and shady promoters. I can handle a few grumpy nobles." Elodie's smile was bittersweet. "This is no Nashville. Here, envy is a blade, and Lully sharpens his." Her words lingered, but Chris was too caught up in the thrill. He was a rock star in a world that didn't know what hit it, and he wasn't about to slow down. Little did he know, the Sun, King himself, was watching. Louis XIV, the godlike monarch who ruled with a flick of his jeweled hand, had heard of the American sorcerer whose music set his court ablaze. And in Versailles, the king's attention was both a blessing and a curse. As Chris played on, the palace hummed with whispers. Some called him a genius, others a devil. But one thing was certain: his arrival had cracked the monotony of Versailles, and the stage was set for a showdown that would echo through time. The chandeliers of Versailles blazed like captured suns, their light dancing across the polished parquet of the Grand Salon. Chris Callahan, Nashville's time-displaced rock star, stood at the center of a swirling crowd of nobles, his fingers coaxing a sultry, upbeat melody from a harpsichord he'd claimed as his own. The instrument, once a relic of rigid minuets, now thrummed with a rhythm that felt like a summer night in Memphishot, reckless and alive. His voice, a smoky blend of grit and velvet, wove through lyrics he'd improvised on the spot. "Take me to the river, let the moonlight glow. We're chasing fever, where the wild things go. Break these chains, let the heartbeats soar. Versailles ain't ready for what's in store." The nobles were spellbound. Women in towering wigs swayed, their silk fans forgotten, while men in velvet coats tapped their heels, caught in the infectious pulse. Elodie, the Viscountess with eyes like a storm over the Smoky Mountains, leaned against a gilded pillar, her lips curved in a knowing smile. She'd become Chris's unofficial muse, her presence a spark that ignited his performances. Tonight, her sapphire gown clung to her like a second skin, and the way she watched him, half predator, half siren, made his pulse race. But not everyone was charmed. In the shadows, Monsieur Lully, the king's music master, seethed. His crimson coat seemed to pulse with his rage, his powdered wig trembling as he whispered to a clique of loyal courtiers. To Lully, Chris was ascendancy, was sacrilege. Chris's musicus pop, as he called it, a term that made Lully scoff, was a disease, infecting the court with its vulgar rhythms. Worse, it was winning hearts. Even Madame de Maintenon, the king's pious mistress, had been seen tapping her foot during one of Chris's impromptu garden shows. Lully's pride, as towering as his wig, couldn't bear it. He'd ruled Versailles' music for decades, his compositions the heartbeat of Louis XIV's court. Now, this American barbarian threatened to steal his crown. Chris, oblivious to the brewing storm, was in his element. After his set, he slung his guitar over his shoulder and joined Elodie at a marble table laden with crystal goblets and sugared fruits. The air was thick with perfume and ambition, the salon a chessboard where every smile hid a strategy. Elodie poured him wine, her fingers brushing his as she handed him the glass. "You're a wildfire, Chris Callahan," she murmured, her voice low, dripping with honey. But fire burns too bright. It draws the hunter's eye. Chris grinned, his Nashville charm dialed to 11. Let him come, darlin'. I've played bars tougher than this palace. Her laughter was a melody, but her eyes held a warning. You jest. But Lully is no mere critic. He has the king's ear, and his envy is a blade. Chris shrugged, sipping his wine. Guy's just mad. His music sounds like a lullaby for robots. I'm here to wake this place up. Elodie's gaze lingered, equal parts amusement and concern. You wake more than the court. You wake desires, dreams, and fears. Her words hung between them, charged with a heat that made Chris's skin tingle. He leaned closer, his voice a playful growl. And what's waking in you, Viscountess? Her lips parted, but before she could answer, a shadow fell over the table. A royal messenger, resplendent in gold braid, bowed stiffly. Monsieur Callahan, he intoned. His Majesty, Louis XIV, summons you to the Apollo Salon at dawn. The room hushed, nobles craned their necks, whispers rippling like wind through a cornfield. Elodie's fan snapped shut. Chris's grin faltered, then widened. The king, huh? Guess he's ready for the Chris Callahan experience. The messenger's face remained stone. Be prompt. His Majesty does not wait. As the messenger departed, the salon erupted in murmurs. A summons from the Sun King was no small thing. It could mean glory or ruin. Elodie gripped Chris's arm, her nails sharp through his leather jacket. Tread carefully, she whispered. Louis is a god here. Please him and you rise. Fail and you fall. Chris winked, but his stomach twisted. He'd faced tough crowds before drunk frat boys, jaded critics, but a king? That was a whole new stage. Dawn painted the palace in hues of rose and gold. As Chris strode to the Apollo Salon, his guitar slung low, his AirPods tucked into his pocket like a talisman. The room was a cathedral of opulence, marble statues of gods, tapestries woven with sunlight, and at its heart, Louis XIV, the Sun King, seated on a throne that gleamed like a supernova. His wig was a cascade of curls, his robes encrusted with jewels, but it was his eyes sharp, unyielding, that pinned Chris like a butterfly. You are the minstrel who disrupts my court, Louis said, his voice a velvet blade. Your music intrigues my nobles. Some call it divine, others demonic. Chris bowed, his heart pounding, but his grin intact. Just call it pop, Your Majesty. It's the sound of freedom, love, and a damn good time. The courtiers gasped. Louis's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Bold words, but words are wind. I require proof of your worth. In 3 days, my court hosts the Festival of the Sun, a celebration of my glory. You will compose a piece to rival Lully's finest. Succeed, and you shall have my favor. Fail, and you will leave Versailles forever. The air thickened. 3 days? To write a banger for a king who could banish him with a flick of his hand? Chris's mind raced. Back in Nashville, he'd churned out hits under pressure, but this was Versailles 1700. No Pro Tools, no synths, just a harpsichord and his wits. I'm in, he said, voice steady, despite the sweat prickling his spine. Get ready for a show, Your Majesty. Louis nodded, dismissing him with a wave. As Chris exited, Lully waited in the corridor, his smile venomous. 3 days is a blink, American, he hissed. Your noise will crumble before the king's ear. Chris met his gaze, unflinching. Keep talking, Lully. I'm about to make your minuets sound like elevator music. Lully's eyes narrowed, but Chris didn't linger. He had work to do. The next 2 days were a blur of sweat and sound. Chris holed up in a candlelit chamber, his harpsichord his only ally. He scribbled notes on parchment, his modern chords clashing with the instrument's antique voice. He wanted something bold, a track that fused his pop roots with Versailles' grandeur, a song that would make Louis dance and Lully choke on his wig. But the clock ticked mercilessly, and doubt crept in. What if he bombed? What if he was stuck in 1700, a nobody in a world of wigs and corsets? Elodie became his anchor. She slipped into his chamber at night, bringing wine and wit, her presence a spark in the gloom. "You're not alone," she said one evening, her fingers tracing the edge of his guitar. "The court craves your fire. Even I—" She paused, her breath catching. "Even I feel it." Chris's throat tightened. He wanted to kiss her, to lose himself in her storm blue eyes, but the song came first. "Help me," he said instead. "Tell me what this place needs." She smiled, wicked and warm. "Versailles is a cage of gold. Your music's freedom. Give them that." Inspired, Chris dove back in. He crafted a melody that soared like a Tennessee sunrise, with a beat that pulsed like a club in Miami. He called it Sunfire, a nod to Louis' ego but laced with his own rebel heart. Elodie clapped as he played a rough cut, her laughter a balm to his nerves. Then, disaster struck. Hours before dawn, Chris found his harpsichord rec strings snapped, keys jammed. A note pinned to it read, "Leave, heretic." Lully's doing, no doubt. Panic surged, but Elodie grabbed his arm. "Use your guitar," she urged. "It's your soul. Let it sing." Chris hesitated. The guitar was his, but it was alien here. A risk. Yet with no choice, he nodded. "All right, let's go rogue." As dawn broke, he restrung his Fender, tuned it by candlelight, and steeled himself. The festival loomed, a crucible where he'd either shine or burn. Elodie kissed his cheek, her lips a fleeting fire. "You're a star, Chris Callahan. Show them." He grinned, adrenaline surging. Time to light up Versailles. But Lully wasn't idle. Rumors swirled of sabotage, missing sheet music, a tampered harpsichord string. One night, Chris caught a cloaked figure slipping from his chamber, a glint of steel in their hand. He gave chase, but the figure vanished into the palace's maze. "Lully's goons," he muttered, his fists clenched. The old man was playing dirty, and Chris was running out of time. The night before the festival, tension crackled like a storm. Chris rehearsed in the grand salon, his fingers flying, his voice raw. Nobles gathered, drawn by the buzz, but Lully's allies heckled, their jeers sharp as glass. "Your noise insults the king," one shouted. Chris ignored them, but the pressure was a vice. Elodie stood by him, her presence a shield, but even she couldn't stop the whispers of doubt. Then, disaster struck. Hours before dawn, Chris found his harpsichord rec strings snapped, keys jammed. A note pinned to it read, "Leave, heretic. Lully's doing, no doubt." Panic surged, but Elodie grabbed his arm. "Use your guitar," she urged. "It's your soul. Let it sing." Chris hesitated. The guitar was his, but it was alien here, a risk, yet with no choice. He nodded. "All right, let's go rogue." As dawn broke, he restrung his Fender, tuned it by candlelight, and steeled himself. The festival loomed, a crucible where he'd either shine or burn. Elodie kissed his cheek, her lips a fleeting fire. "You're a star, Chris Callahan. Show them." He grinned, adrenaline surging. Time to light up Versailles. The Festival of the Sun dawned over Versailles like a supernova, the palace aglow with 1,000 candles, their flames mirrored in the polished marble and crystal. The gardens bloomed with lanterns, their light weaving through fountains that danced to the rhythm of an unseen pulse. Nobles in jewel-encrusted silks thronged the Grand Trianon, their laughter and whispers a symphony of anticipation. Tonight, Louis XIV, the Sun King, would bask in his own glory, and Chris Callahan, Nashville's time-traveling rock star, was about to play the gig of his life or lose everything. Chris stood backstage in a makeshift alcove, his Fender guitar slung low, its sleek curves a stark contrast to the powdered wigs and lace cuffs around him. His leather jacket was gone, replaced by a borrowed velvet coat in midnight blue, a compromise to blend in. But his ripped jeans and boots screamed rebellion, and the glint in his hazel eyes promised a show no one would forget. His heart pounded like a kick drum, adrenaline surging as he tuned his guitar, each note a defiance against the sabotage that had wrecked his harpsichord. Lully's note leave, heretic burned in his memory, fueling his resolve. This wasn't just a performance, it was war. Elodie slipped through the velvet curtains, her emerald gown shimmering like a forest under moonlight. Her hair, freed from its usual pins, cascaded in waves, and her eyes held a fire that made Chris's breath catch. She carried a goblet of wine, but her presence was intoxicating enough. "The court is ravenous," she murmured, her voice a sultry caress. "They whisper of you, Chris Callahan. Some call you a god, others a devil, but all crave your music." Chris grinned, his Nashville swagger unshaken. "Good. Let 'em crave. I'm about to serve a main course they'll never forget." Her lips curved, but worry shadowed her gaze. "Lully is plotting. I heard him boast to his allies that your noise will falter before the king. He's ensured the court's musicians are ready to drown you out if you stumble." Chris's jaw tightened. "Let him try. I've faced hecklers in dive bars from Memphis to Miami. This ain't my first rodeo." Elodie stepped closer, her perfumey a mix of jasmine and danger enveloping him. "This is no bar, my wild American. This is Versailles. One misstep, and Louis will cast you out." Her fingers brushed his, lingering. "But I believe in you. Make them dance, Chris. Make them feel." Her words lit a spark in his chest. He wanted to pull her close, to lose himself in the storm of her eyes, but the roar of the crowd beyond the curtains called. "Stay close," he said, voice low. "You're my lucky charm." She smiled, a siren's promise. Always. The Grand Trianon stage was a marvel, a raised platform framed by gilded statues of Apollo, the god of music, their eyes seeming to judge. Louis XIV sat at the center of the audience, his throne elevated, his robes a cascade of gold and crimson. His face was a mask of regal calm, but his fingers tapped lightly on the armrest, a sign of curiosity or impatience. Beside him, Madame de Maintenon watched with pursed lips, while Lully, in his crimson coat, stood at the king's left, his smirk a blade. The court's musicians, armed with violins and flutes, lined the wings, ready to leap in at Lully's command. Chris stepped onto the stage, guitar gleaming under the candlelight. The crowd hushed, then buzzed with murmurs. His modern silhouette jeans, boots, and that alien instrument drew gasps. A noblewoman in the front row dropped her fan. A duke muttered, "Sorcery." Chris ignored them, his focus laser sharp. He adjusted the guitar strap, flashed a grin, and spoke, his voice carrying like a summer breeze over the Tennessee River. "Your Majesty, lords, ladies, this one's for you. It's called Sunfire. Let's light up Versailles." He struck the first chord, a bold, electric strum that echoed like thunder. The crowd flinched, then leaned forward. His fingers danced across the strings, weaving a melody that was both alien and irresistibly a fusion of pop swagger and Baroque grandeur. The rhythm kicked in, a pulse that throbbed like a club in South Beach, layered with soaring notes that evoked a Nashville skyline at dawn. His voice, raw and soulful, cut through the air. Sunfire rising, burning through the night, chasing shadows, setting hearts alight. We're the rebels, breaking every chain. Feel the fever, let it spark the flame. The nobles were stunned, then entranced. Elodie, near the stage, swayed, her eyes locked on Chris, her lips parted in awe. Even Madame de Maintenon's stern facade cracked, her foot tapping faintly, but Lully's face twisted with fury. He signaled his musicians, who began to play a shrill, competing minuet meant to drown Chris out. The clash was chaos, a musical duel that threatened to unravel the performance. Chris didn't falter. He caught Lully's eye, smirked, and cranked up the volume, his guitar wailing like a banshee. He improvised, weaving the minuet's melody into his own, turning Lully's sabotage into a bridge for Sunfire. The crowd roared, clapping, some rising to their feet. Louis's fingers stopped tapping. His eyes gleamed with something like delight. But Lully wasn't done. As Chris hit the chorus, a stagehand, clearly one of Lully's lackeys, rushed forward, pretending to adjust a candle, but aiming to knock the guitar from Chris's hands. Elodie saw it first, shouting, "Chris!" He dodged, spinning without missing a beat, his fingers never leaving the strings. The stagehand stumbled, crashing into a prop table, and the crowd laughed, thinking it part of the show. Chris seized the moment, leaping to the edge of the stage, his guitar screaming a solo that felt like a lightning storm over the Grand Canyon. He locked eyes with Louis, pouring every ounce of his soul into the music. The king leaned forward, captivated. Lully's musicians faltered, their instruments falling silent as Chris's sound consumed the space. The nobles were on their feet, swaying, some daring to dance scandalous for Versailles' rigid etiquette. Elodie clapped, her laughter a melody of triumph. As the final chord rang out, the Trianon erupted. Cheers, applause, even screams, a sound Versailles had never heard. Louis rose, silencing the crowd with a raised hand. His gaze pinned Chris, unreadable. The air crackled with tension. Would he praise or condemn? "Monsieur Callahan," Louis said, his voice resonant, "your music is extraordinary. It is not of this world, yet it moves us. You have pleased us greatly." The court gasped, then cheered again. Lully's face was a mask of defeat, his hands trembling. Elodie rushed to Chris, throwing her arms around him, her lips brushing his ear. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with pride. Chris grinned, sweat-soaked and exhilarated. "Told ya I'd light it up." Louis raised a hand again. "We offer you a place as our court's music master, to serve beside Monsieur Lully. Your Sunfire shall be the anthem of our festivals. What say you?" The offer was a crown, but it came with chains. Chris glanced at Elodie, her eyes a storm of hope and fear. He could stay, rule Versailles' music, live in luxury, but he'd be tethered to a world not his own. Before he could answer, a figure emerged from the crowd. A man in a strange, shimmering cloak, his face half hidden. He leaned close, his voice a whisper only Chris could hear. "The portal is open," he said. "The portal to your time. It closes at midnight. Choose quickly, traveler." Chris's heart lurched. A way home? To Nashville? To 2025? To his life? But what about Elodie, Versailles, the music he'd ignited here? The man vanished into the crowd, leaving Chris frozen, his guitar still warm in his hands. Louis awaited his answer. Elodie's hand tightened on his arm. The court watched, breathless. Chris's grin returned, but it was tinged with uncertainty. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady but his mind a whirlwind. "I need a moment to think." The king nodded, amused. "You have until midnight. Do not test our patience." As the crowd dispersed, Elodie pulled him aside, her eyes searching his. "What did that man say?" she demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "What is this portal?" Chris hesitated, the weight of his choice crushing. "It's a way back," he admitted. "To my time, my home." Her face paled, but her grip didn't falter. "And will you go?" He looked at her, at the palace, at the guitar that had just conquered a king. "I don't know," he said, voice raw. "But I've got till midnight to figure out." The Grand Trianon pulsed with the afterglow of Chris Callahan's triumph, the air thick with the scent of wax, perfume, and victory. The Festival of the Sun had crowned him a legend, his Sunfire anthem echoing in the hearts of Versailles nobles, who still buzzed with the memory of his guitar's wail and the scandalous sight of their own dancing feet. Louis XIV's offerto serve as court music master hung like a golden chain, promising glory but binding him to a world 3 centuries before his own. Yet the mysterious traveler's whisper, "The portal is open," burned brighter, a siren call to Nashville, 2025, and the life he'd left behind. With midnight looming, Chris faced a choice that could rewrite his destiny or break his heart. He stood in a moonlit garden, the palace's fountains whispering secrets as their sprays caught the silver light. His Fender guitar rested against a marble bench, its strings glinting like a lover's promise. Elodie, the Viscountess who'd become his muse and fire, stood beside him, her emerald gown replaced by a simpler silk dress that clung to her curves, its neckline daringly low for Versailles. Her hair, loose and wild, framed her face like a storm cloud, and her sapphire eyes held a mix of desire and dread. She'd followed him here, sensing the weight of his silence after Louis's offer and the stranger's cryptic words. "Chris," she said, her voice a velvet blade, "you're slipping away. I see it in your eyes. What did that man mean by portal?" Her fingers grazed his arm, warm through his velvet coat, pulling him back to the present. Chris exhaled, running a hand through his tousled black hair. His Nashville drawl was soft, raw. "It's a way home, Elodie. Back to my time, 2025, Tennessee. My studio, my life. But it closes at midnight, and He trailed off, his gaze locked on her, the woman who'd matched his fire and challenged his heart. "I don't know if I can leave you." Her breath hitched, but she stepped closer, her body inches from his, the heat between them electric. "Then stay," she whispered, her lips so close he could taste her words. "You've conquered Versailles. You've made me feel things I never knew possible. Stay, and we'll burn this court to ash with your music." Her words were a spell, her touch a flame. Chris's hands found her waist, pulling her against him. And for a moment, the world was just thermal curves under silk, his heartbeat syncing with hers. He kissed her, fierce and hungry, like a man drowning in a song he'd never finish. Her fingers tangled in his hair, her lips yielding yet demanding, and the garden seemed to spin, the stars above blurring into streaks of light. But the kiss broke, and reality crashed back. Chris pulled away, his chest heaving. "Your trouble, Viscountess," he said, a half grin masking the ache in his voice. "But I gotta think clear. This ain't just about us. It's about who I am." Elodie's eyes flashed, wounded but defiant. "And who are you, Chris Callahan? A minstrel of the future, or a man who belongs here, with me?" Before he could answer, a rustle in the hedges snapped their attention. A figure emerged, not the cloaked traveler, but Monsieur Lully, his crimson coat a slash of malice in the moonlight. His wig was askew, his face twisted with a desperation that bordered on madness. Behind him, 2 guards loomed, their swords glinting. Chris's stomach dropped. Lully hadn't just lost the musical duel, he'd lost his pride, and now he was out for blood. "You thought you'd humiliate me and walk free?" Lully hissed, his voice a venomous rasp. "Your Sunfire is a blight, and you are a heretic. The king may be charmed, but I'll see you gone by blade if need be." Chris stepped in front of Elodie, his grin gone, his fists clenched. "You're out of moves, Lully. The king loves my sound. You touch me, you're toast." Lully's laugh was cold, unhinged. "The king sleeps, and these guards answer to me. Versailles is my domain, American. You'll vanish, and your portal will be a myth." He nodded to the guards, who advanced, steel flashing. Elodie grabbed Chris's arm, her voice urgent. "Run! The gardens lead to the palace's west wing. There's a hidden passage." Chris hesitated, his blood roaring. He wasn't a fighter, but he wasn't a coward either. "I don't run from bullies," he growled, snatching his guitar like a weapon. But Elodie's nails dug into his skin, her eyes pleading. "For me, Chris, live to fight another day." He cursed under his breath, then nodded. They bolted, the guards' boots pounding behind them. The gardens were a maze of hedges and statues, the moonlight casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Chris's heart thundered, his guitar bouncing against his back as he followed Elodie's lead. She moved like a panther, her dress billowing, her knowledge of the palace their only edge. They ducked into a narrow passage behind a fountain, the stone door creaking shut just as the guard's swords scraped the wall. Inside, the air was cool, the corridor lit by a single torch. Elodie leaned against the wall, panting, her chest rising and falling in a way that made Chris's throat tighten, despite the danger. "We're safe for now," she said. "But Lully won't stop. He'll hunt you until you're gone or dead." Chris's jaw clenched. "Then I'll face him. But first, I need that portal." He checked his watch, a modern relic hidden under his sleeve. 11:30. 30 minutes to find the traveler and make his choice. Elodie led him through the passage, her hand in his, their footsteps echoing. The corridor opened into a forgotten chamber, its walls adorned with faded tapestries. At its center stood the traveler, his shimmering cloak now glowing faintly, like a star trapped in fabric. His face was still half hidden, but his eyes were sharp, knowing. "You're late," he said, his voice a low hum. "The portal is here, but it's unstable. Step through now, or stay forever." Chris stared at the air beside the traveler, where a faint ripple shimmered, like heat rising from a desert road. Beyond it, He glimpsed flashes of Nashville, his studio, the neon glow of Broadway, the hum of his old life. His heart ached for it, for the freedom of his time, the roar of a crowd that knew his name. But then he looked at Elodie, her face a storm of love and fear, and the ache doubled. "Why me?" Chris demanded, his voice rough. "Why'd I get yanked here?" The traveler's lips twitched. "Time chooses its players. You were meant to shake this world, and you have. Now, choose your stage." Elodie's grip tightened. "Chris, if you go, what becomes of me? Of us?" Her voice broke, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable, her fire dimmed by the threat of loss. Chris's mind raced. Stay, and he'd be a legend in Versailles, but a prisoner of time, forever dodging Lully's blades and navigating court intrigues. Go, and he'd reclaim his life, but lose Elodie, the woman who'd made this strange world feel like home. The portal pulsed, its ripples growing erratic. The traveler's eyes narrowed. 10 minutes, Callahan. Decide. Before Chris could speak, a crash echoed from the passage. Lully's voice snarled. "Find them!" The guards were close, their swords scraping stone. Elodie's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "If you stay, we fight," she said, her voice fierce. "If you go, I'll hold them off, but choose now." Chris's heart pounded, torn between two worlds. He grabbed his guitar, its weight grounding him. "Elodie is." His words caught as the portal flared, a burst of light illuminating the chamber. The traveler stepped back, his cloak dissolving into shadow. 5 minutes, he warned, then vanished. Lully's guards burst in, swords drawn. Elodie shoved Chris toward the portal. "Go!" she cried, snatching a candelabra to fend off the nearest guard. Chris hesitated, his soul screaming to stay, to fight for her. But the portal's pull was relentless, its light blinding. He took one last look at Elodie, hair wild, her eyes blazing as she swung the candelabra like a warrior queen, and made his choice. He dove through the portal, guitar in hand, the world dissolving into a whirlwind of light and sound. Elodie's cry echoed in his ears, then faded. When the light cleared, he was sprawled on the floor of his Nashville studio, the scent of coffee and vinyl grounding him. His watch read 2:17 a.m., May 2, 2025. He was home, but as he stood, his guitar still clutched tight. A note slipped from its strings, a scrap of parchment in Elodie's handwriting. "Find me, wild American. Time is not done with us." Chris's breath caught, his heart racing with a new fire. Was she out there, somehow, in his time? Or was this a challenge to return, to chase the portal again? He grinned, the thrill of the unknown igniting his soul. "Oh, this ain't over," he murmured, strumming a single chord that echoed like a promise. Versailles had changed him, and Elodie had claimed him. Whatever came next, he'd find Harrer, die trying. And for those craving the rest of this tale, the saga of Chris and Elodie continues. Will he hunt the portal, defy time, or uncover her in his own world? Tune into my channel for the next chapter, where the music never stops and the stakes only climb higher.